everyone, and welcome to this screencast in our ongoing course this semester, our senior seminar class, where we're doing a deep dive into the book Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. In this screencast, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of chapters here, actually 3 chapters, chapters 13, 14, 15, as we kind of wrap up our study of this text. So we're going to start out taking a look at chapter 13, which is entitled The Power of Outcome Focusing. You'll remember in this section, the past 3 chapters have focused on a number of important principles that Allen has in this text. The first one, going back to chapter 11, the power of the capturing habit. He's trying to help us to really get a handle on the capturing process and making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row with regard to that. The second principle that he looks at is in chapter 12, the power of next action decision making. He's trying to get us to really make sure that in all that we do, meetings, projects, whatever it is that comes to us, that we develop the habit of asking the question, what is the next action? I find this really, really helpful in my own life, both in terms of the work that I do and also personally. Then in chapter 13, he wants us to really examine those outcomes that we want to achieve, both at the lower levels of day-to-day projects and also the upper levels of our lives as well. He says that it's really difficult to understand and identify the next actions in our various projects if we don't have clarity on the outcomes. So hopefully that makes sense. He really wants to get us to focus on what are the outcomes, what are the goals that we have with the various things that come to us in our lives. The key here, I think, is that if you want to have that sort of life that is stress-free and allows you to be present, truly present with the people around you, the clients you have, colleagues, family, your spouse, kids, this focus, this clarity on the outcomes, clarity that will allow you to identify those next actions can really help to put your mind and your mental state at ease. So in this chapter, he pulls us back a bit to chapter 3, where he introduced that natural planning process of capturing, clarifying, organizing, reflecting, and doing. You may want to go back and take a look at that in chapter 3. But knowing what done looks like is the key here. Having clarity on the vision of what you're doing makes all the difference, I think, between stress-free productivity and stressful productivity. Now, in the last section of this chapter, he discusses how to make this outcome focusing a part of your organization's culture as well as your personal life. And it comes down simply to asking questions. What do you want to have happen at this meeting? What's the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish with this product that we want to sell or make? What's the goal of this particular marketing campaign that I'm investing in? What's the goal of this paper that I'm writing? What's the outcome or the goal related to my search for, could be anything, a new job or an apartment, or what's the outcome or goal in terms of my relationship with my sibling? In other words, he's just trying to get us to look at this question of what does done look like? And he suggests that asking these kinds of questions will help to get our focus on the purpose of what we're doing and the vision surrounding all the various things that we do. And I think that having that kind of clarity will give us a tremendous peace of mind. And therein, I think for Allen, is where the power of outcome focusing comes in. Then in chapter 14, he takes a look at GTD and cognitive science. And in this section, he simply takes a look at the kinds of research that's been done in recent years related to some of the principles that he tries to articulate in this book. And his overarching goal for this chapter is to suggest that, hey, these ideas that I'm trying to communicate in this text are not just the ideas of one guy. These ideas have been supported, have been tested, and have been run through the gamut, as it were, of a lot of cognitive science studies and work, and these studies have all demonstrated the validity of many of these principles. Now, I'm going to let you go through these sections for yourself, but he focuses primarily on positive psychology, on distributed cognition, relieving the cognitive load of incompletions, a really interesting field of flow theory and self-leadership theory, as well as goal striving via implementation intentions and the psychological capital. So these are the main fields that he focuses on in this chapter, and how those fields have all helped to support many of the principles that he's arguing for in this text. Now, one element that I wanted to highlight in this chapter is the section on distributed cognition, the value of the external mind. And in this section, he brings in elements of cognitive science to support one of the key ideas of this book, and that is that our minds are not particularly good at capturing and processing and storing information. If you look at the quote in the first paragraph of this section, toward the bottom of the paragraph, he says, "Your mind is designed to have ideas based upon pattern detection, but it isn't designed to remember much of anything." And this is an important point because many of us have, I think, built our lives around being able to remember things and keep things in our heads. And some of this, as I've said before, are very good at it. Others are not so good. But either way, we're used to doing things this way, using our minds as a system for storing and retrieving and remembering stuff. And so this can be an incredibly hard habit to break. But this is such an important point. He makes the point at the bottom of what is my page 277. It's also in this section on distributed cognition. He says the bottom line is that when you use your memory as your organizing system, as most everyone on the planet still does, for most of what they're doing to manage their lives, your mind will effectively become overwhelmed and incompetent. This is such an important point. I hope if there's nothing else you take away from reading through and working through this book, is that our minds are a really poor place to remember things. And as I've said way back in the beginning of this course when we first started looking at this system, if you're one of those people that have had some trouble keeping all of the various balls in your life spinning at the same time, I'm just here to tell you that your lives, as you graduate and move on into bigger and better things, as you take on more responsibilities in your workplace, in your home, as you grow families potentially, those balls are going to multiply tenfold, and you're going to have all sorts of other things that you need to keep spinning at the same time. And I'm just telling you that keeping this stuff in your head is not going to serve you well in the long run. So it's really important to get this idea and get it down carefully. By the way, I'd like to show you a real-world example of this if you're interested. I'm not sure if you all listen to podcasts or if you're familiar with the very famous podcast entitled Serial. I'll put a link in the description of this video for you so that you can check out episode 1 of season 1. Serial is a podcast that looks at a couple of challenging criminal cases. I believe there's 3 or 4 seasons. I can't remember how many of them there are, but they're really, really good. And the first season deals with a criminal case set in Baltimore where a high school student, a 17-year-old high school student, is charged with killing his girlfriend. And this reporter takes up this case and begins to look at it and see the complexities around it. And it's a really, really interesting case. The guy that committed this crime, or supposedly committed this crime, is still in jail for it. And when the Serial podcast came out, the case was actually got some more attention, and there's still some discussion and still some work being done on this case. I can tell you when I got to the end of this first season, I was skeptical as to whether or not this guy had actually committed this crime, but it's a really, really good story, and you'll see kind of the complexities of the criminal case and what all's involved here. The reason why I'm highlighting this is in the very first episode of this first season, this reporter deals with the problem that we all have with remembering stuff. And she takes the listener through a little exercise of talking about how we have such a difficult time remembering something that we did even a week ago. If she were to ask you, what did you do last Thursday, and describe it in a very detailed way, we would have a hard time doing that. Our minds just don't capture and keep that kinds of information. So anyway, I'd like you to take a listen to that first episode and just kind of get a feel for what we're talking about here when it comes to the fact that our minds are not a good repository for information. And this will illustrate in a real world way the problems that we face when it comes to remembering things. And if you listen to this episode in its entirety, I guarantee you'll be hooked into the season. It's a really, really good story. Anyway, back to our text. The other section that I think is worth noting in this particular chapter is the section on relieving the cognitive load of incompletions. Relieving the cognitive load of incompletions. Here he focuses on the work of Roy Baumeister, who looked at how uncompleted tasks take up room in the mind, which then limits clarity and focus. And this has been an ongoing point that he's made over and over again, that these uncompleted tasks that we have in our mind, that we store in our mind, have a tendency to really wreak havoc on our own psyche as we try to keep all of these balls spinning. So I like that section as well. Then in chapter 15, the last chapter of the book, he titles this The Path of GTD Mastery. And here in this chapter, he discusses the 3 stages of mastery that he's seen over the many years of working with clients. And I think that this chapter and the conclusion of this book might be a good place to assess where you are in the process of mastering this GTD method and what you might need to do to advance the next level. For most, if not all of you, level 1 is mastering the basics. And this is where you are. In some ways, this is where I still am. Learning how to capture stuff, tweaking those buckets, realizing that your brain is not the best place to organize your life, learning to ask those questions like, what's the next action? And getting in the habit of doing a weekly review. It takes a bit to build this muscle memory in our lives and to break old habits, but he gives some good basic points in this section of the book to help keep you going. I know in my own life I still struggle with a weekly review habit. So wherever you are, just think about how you can build that muscle memory regarding these various practices. And the other thing he mentions in this chapter is don't worry if you fall off the wagon, as it were. It's easy to get back on. He says that it can take up to 2 years to develop this level of basic mastery. And I can attest to that. Old habits are really, really hard to break. Now, at the graduate level, level 2, he talks about total life management systems, making sure that your projects and your actions are working toward those higher goals. This level is focused with the bigger picture items, such as your various roles and accountability circles, like your family and work and relationships, those kinds of things. At this level, he says that our projects more truly reflect our roles in life rather than just being a reaction to our action list. The point here, I think, is that at this stage, our higher horizons are more clearly in focus and driving the various projects that we do. For most of us, I think it's all we can do to keep our heads above water. But this is something that we can at least aspire to down the road. This same higher focus is also connected to what he calls the postgraduate level of implementation. Mastery at this level opens up new vistas for creativity and freedom to engage the things I think that are most important to us. I know for me, I'm pretty far from this level, but I'm continually trying to push into that level of GTD maturity. Okay, so finally, let me mention just a few things about the conclusion of this book. Don't neglect this 2-page roadmap to moving forward in this system. he ends the book by giving us a great list of tips for moving forward in this system. And you'll notice here that a couple of these tips are included in the various blogs and reflections that we've discussed earlier. Particularly here is clarity about your containers or inboxes, which I had you write a blog on that. And then also having clarity about your buckets, making sure that all of those buckets are tweaked and really working for you. So use this bulleted list as a checklist to implement this system. I think that will really help you to kind of assess where you are in mastering the GTD system. So I hope you've enjoyed this text as we've worked through it in class. I am asking you to write a summary review of the book in your blog. This is in addition to the other GTD posts that you already have. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how this text has helped you and what you might need to do to get to the next level. Just take a few minutes and jot down your thoughts about that. Also, put some of your ideas about these last few chapters in the Slack channel. I'd really appreciate seeing some of those ideas. So I hope you've enjoyed it as we've worked through this text. I think this book can have a really important impact on your life moving forward into the next stages of your life and the complexities that are about to come to you. I hope the takeaways here have been good and helpful. So until next time, thanks for listening. Take care.